many of you, and thank you to the 5 candidates coming along this evening. Hopefully a civilised and respectful evening, so please respect everyone's views here. There will be a lot of views in the room, I'm sure, and please bear in mind those around you, what they may or may not think, when you make your own views known. Now, we are in interesting times. This week, Antonio Guterres from the United Nations, the Secretary, announced we are at a point of no return. The future is not over the horizon, it is hurtling towards us. Earlier this year, State of Nature report here in the UK indicated that 41% of all species, wildlife species in the UK are declining. Locally, if you read your newspapers and you look at the weather reports, you look at the pollen count, you can now look at the carbon count, and the carbon outside the door as we stand here now is a third over the safe levels as deemed to be, and has been so for the last six months here in the UK around Shropshire. And particularly local to us today, a very sort of symbolic moment possibly, just down the road, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. We saw the demolition of the cooling towers at Armbridge Power Station. Interesting times indeed, and I hope we're going to have a really interesting and informative debate here this evening as well. So the form of the evening is that I'm going to ask each of the candidates to do 2 minutes just to introduce themselves, and then we are going to have around 6 to 7 questions from the audience that have been selected, just to give it a sort of a bit of a order, if you like. There was an awful lot of questions submitted over the last week or so thank you all for doing that. Well, we've selected 6 or 7 to get the evening going. We'll last around about an hour and a quarter, and we'll finish with a more general sort of hopeful question and answer sessions if we have the time. So without further ado, I wonder if I could, in the order that I'm standing that way, completely random, Mr. Liberal Democrat, Nat, tell us about yourself.
Hello, yes, it's working, good. Hello, my name is Nat Green, I'm a councillor and I was born and raised in this town, and I am here, as you probably know, as the Liberal Democrat candidate. We have an incredibly strong set of environmental policies. In fact, they're wound into all sorts of the industrial and transport policies and also biodiversity. So that's why I'm here today. I'm very proud to be hoping to represent my town, and I hope that in due course you will be able to support me. Thank you.
Julia.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Julia Buckley, and I'm proud to be here tonight representing the Labour Party. As you know, our main policies are to immediately reverse the 9 years of damaging austerity cuts which have affected all our public services. But it's so much more than just reinvesting in our community. It's also about transforming society back into a compassionate, caring, responsible society that puts people before profit, that takes responsibility for the environment around us. Now, we have an environment policy for the climate emergency which is twin, so both decarbonisation by 2030, but also a huge investment, so a major economic package to bring about renewables and investment in future technologies. Now, for those of you who know me, I have 25 years experience, so I consider myself to be somewhat of an expert in EU policy. I'm going to come clean, and I'm going to say I'm not an expert in environmental policy. But luckily, the Labour Party's view about that is the same as Greta Thunberg's. And the view is that we should stop listening to politicians, and we should start listening to scientists. And the 3 values that underpin Labour's policy are ambition based on science, to follow the evidence-led path, that our interventions be transformative to bring about structural change. No tinkering around the edges, but this has got to start now and start big. And finally, for Labour, that all of those interventions are still underpinned by social justice. So new jobs be upheld by trade union rights and high skills and high values. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Julian Dean. I'm a Green Party candidate. I'm a local councillor, and my background is in teaching, and I do a bit of music writing in the area. 18 months ago, this Hustings would not have taken place. And I think it's a tribute to the people in the room who've organised it, to Greta Thunberg, to Old Attenborough, but most of all to the movement that this is taking place. 18 months ago, we learned from the international climate scientists that we basically have 12 years, now about 10 years, to reverse catastrophic climate change. We need to keep the temperature down to 1.5. We are heading towards 4 degrees, which is going to, as I say, have a catastrophic effect on our climate and on our civilization. We're not just talking about the weather. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about a breakdown of society in all sorts of different ways. You're going to hear tonight from all the parties about how they have shifted massively on this issue, which is fantastic. The question you're going to need to ask yourselves is it enough? You will hear, I suspect in a few minutes, from the Conservatives who will very proudly tell you that they've reduced our carbon emissions by 44%. Actually, we're talking there about domestic emissions. We're not talking about flights. We're not talking about imports. If you add in all the emissions that we as a country are responsible for, it's about 10%. We then need to move on and deal with transport, which is now a much bigger issue than even energy production. We need to talk about agriculture. We need to talk about our homes and transfer all of those. But tonight is not about technical detail. It is about whether people are facing up to the challenge. And I would suggest to you that the Green Party's Green New Deal does exactly that.
Locke, and I'm the independent candidate for Shrewsbury Atcham. As an independent candidate, I am able to vote in the best way possible to best vote in favour of sustainable and renewable energy, because as it's been made very clear, we're beyond the point of no return and we have to act now and we have to act quickly, and it's about putting in the policies now that moving forward can make the biggest changes and making those changes on a national and on a local level. And the other thing that's so fantastic that we need to also remember that the climate crisis goes much further beyond party politics. It's something that is affecting the whole world. So it's not about competing between parties for who can get the best deal. It's about, as a whole planet, as a whole country, as a community, what can we do to save the planet we live on? What can we do with other nations to make sure that our planet and the human race and all other species survive? And that's what today is about, and it is so brilliant to see so many people here that care about this issue, and hopefully it will continue to gain momentum and we'll be able to do something.
Well, we meet on the day that the coal-fired power station in Hillbush, the cooling towers were destroyed. This started off as a coal-powered fire station, then was moved because of CO2 emissions to more of a biomass power station, and yet we destroyed it. And that just epitomizes how the United Kingdom is reducing CO2 emissions faster than any of the G20 industrialized nations. These are our main competitors around the world, and yet we are reducing CO2 emissions faster than all of them and European Union countries. Unfortunately, China is building 2 of these Hillbush power stations every week, and the United States of America is not taking climate change seriously. So clearly, if the Conservative government is re-elected to office, we're going to have to do more to engage with America and China and some of the world's worst polluters to make sure that they follow the United Kingdom's path on this. We now have more offshore wind than any other country in Europe, and by 2030, 30% of all electricity produced in the United Kingdom will be from offshore wind. That's 40 gigawatts. Emissions are down in this country by 43% since 1990. But the last thing I'd like to say is this. We've only done this, we've only led on this issue across the world by maintaining a strong economy and supporting businesses like British Steel and others that are very dependent on making sure that their costs of energy don't go up. There is a binary choice of this issue, Mr Johnson or Mr Corbyn, and I don't believe Mr Corbyn will instigate a strong economy which will allow us to continue prioritising this issue.
Right, thank you everybody. Now we're going to go straight to the questions. There are people around the floor here ready to ask those questions. The candidates will be given 2 minutes each to answer that, or thereabouts. If it goes on longer, I'm going to cut them off, otherwise we're going to have a bit of a riot. So I want some structure. And the first question is, it's not Mike Street, is it? No, it's been changed, apparently.
I'm going to read the question out for my husband.
Yeah. Would you introduce yourself anyway? It's Mrs. Stingley anyway.
So, Heather Streetley, I'm reading out this question for my husband.
Can't hear you.
Hello, I'm Heather Streetley, and I'm reading out this question for my husband Mike. In its 2019 progress report, the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change reports that UK action to curb greenhouse gas emissions is lagging behind what is needed to meet legally binding emissions targets, and that since June 2018, the government has fully delivered only 1 out of 25 critical policies that are needed to get emission reductions back on track. It identifies a series of urgent actions needed in 2020 to get back on track across all sectors of government and industry. If elected, do you commit to making these delayed actions an immediate priority for the new government in 2020?
So the question then is, lagging behind on the targets we've already set ourselves. What is the reaction of the candidates here? Okay, we'll start this end, and then every time we'll have a new person starting, just to give you a bit of pre-warning. So now you can start, please.
Thank you. Well, to address that, we will accelerate the deployment of renewable power and provide more funding, removing Conservatives' restrictions on solar, wind and building more power stations, interconnectors to guarantee security of supply. We aim to reach at least 80% renewable electricity in the UK by 2030. We'll be expanding community and decentralised energy, support councils to develop local electricity generation and require all new homes to be fitted with solar panels. We'll ban fracking because of its negative impacts. We'll support investment and innovation in cutting-edge energy technologies and provide an additional 12 billion over 5 years to support these commitments. So I think we've got a pretty robust approach to trying to get ourselves back on track in reducing the amount of carbon that we have.
Thank you. I think there are 4 different areas here. So firstly, we think that the state should intervene more, rather than sitting back and waiting for the private sector to take on only those projects which are economically viable. So you see things like the electric hydro station didn't go ahead around here because it didn't have enough funding. The state will intervene. We will set up our own bank that will put forward funding for large infrastructure projects to bankroll renewable energy and give that upfront funding. That's at the large scale. But also on the small scale, we'll make 2.3 billion available so that 4 million ordinary people like all of us tonight can either have a grant or a loan to improve our own homes, whether that's renewable energy from solar panels or whether it's having insulation fitted to reduce our consumption. But there's something else, and it's about regulation. So we'll have this zero carbon rule that all new houses must be built from zero carbon. We'll be putting in regulations which prevent people from selling off the green belt like we've seen in the villages around Shrewsbury. So I think we have to protect, but we also have to invest and encourage every single person to play their part.
Thank you.
I think it's really important we understand why we're in the situation we're in. Over the last few years, these are the Tory policies that have led us down the road of being nowhere near being where we need to be. We've seen the carbon zero homes policy was scrapped. There was a plan to bring it in. We saw the feed-in tariffs for solar electricity scrapped. We've seen tax breaks for wind energy scrapped. We've seen the fuel escalators tax scrapped. We've seen the Green Investment Bank sold. We've seen the Swansea Tidal Lagoon cancelled. My list goes on. I will stop there. This is a disastrous period of history where a government has been entirely negligent on this policy. The Green Party is proposing £100 billion a year investment. Now that is a shockingly large amount of money, there is no question about it. But this is a shockingly difficult situation that we face. And the reason we call our deal the Green New Deal is it draws on history. It draws on the history of how the United States pulled itself out of the Great Depression, which actually was also an environmental disaster. If you remember those images of the Dust Bowl. And it was about investing enormous amounts, putting people to work, and in our case it's putting people to work to build renewables. Did you know that although we have, it's true, the largest offshore wind farms, it's not really surprising, we're on island, but we have the largest offshore wind, but we don't actually make any of those turbines onshore at all, because the subsidies are gone, they are all imported. And actually the amount of wind energy that Germany produces actually is more, and most of it is onshore, so we need to reverse the complete stopping of onshore wind as well. So the £100 billion is about investing in renewable energy, it's about investing in carbon zero homes, it's about investing in the transport infrastructure which allows the 40% decline in car use that we absolutely need. And this is not because we hate cars, it's because this is what the science tells us that we absolutely have to do. So we have a costed, and it is a very expensive scheme, but it's about investing. And the exciting thing is that all of those investments actually make our lives better. They make our homes warmer. They make our communities more accessible for people who actually don't get access to the car lanes. So this is oh, I've lost my train of thought. So I should really
To answer very simply, yes, those policies do need to be put into place and quickly. I was researching into what those 25 policies were based on, and it's about reducing emissions in power, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture and waste. And so far, the policy mentioned that has been acted on is in power, and we have managed to reduce emissions there somewhat. So from there, it's then focusing on that also, but as well the other 24 policies. So it's funding the CCS technology to reduce carbon emissions in industry, and the technology is being developed now, but it's only set to be ready to put into action in 2030, which is too late to be starting that process. So we need to get that pushed forward as quickly as possible. With transport, that actually produces 23% of total emissions for the country, and so we need to invest on a national scale in public transport, and on an international scale we need to push for biofuels and electrofuels in flights. Also for within European travel, because we're such a close network of countries, using trains for international transport, so on such short distance. It's so possible, and yet we don't use it, and we need to. On a more personal and sort of on the ground level, we need better insulation in homes, and for all of these new builds, and I mean in the local area we're building so many new homes, they all need to be carbon zero, and that's not as difficult as it seems that it should be. It's given that it should be that these houses are being immediately built as carbon zero, and they're not, and putting in that insulation to make sure that it is ridiculous. It should be there, and those policies should already be set up so that it's a sustainable and easy lifestyle to have that isn't detrimental to the environment. So if I was MP, I would be very actively campaigning towards the net zero carbon goals, and it needs to be before 2030 realistically.
Well, in our manifesto, we are putting an additional £1 billion of your money, taxpayers' money, into ensuring that there are more car charging points. Under our administration, we now have over 7 million homes provided electricity and energy through green energy. And of course, during our term of office, £92 billion over the last 9 years has been invested in green technology by the private sector. But of course, the United Kingdom, as you know, is only responsible for 1% of CO2 emissions around the world. And that's why it's so important to help third world countries. I voted for 0.7% of GDP to be tied to third world aid, and we are now sending £15 billion a year of your money every year in international aid. As part of that, in our manifesto, we are committed to a total of £11 billion of your money over the course of the next Parliament being targeted to help third world countries in reducing their CO2 emissions.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, we're ready for the next question. We've tried to batch these questions up as a theme, so obviously there's an energy theme to this one, that one. This one is more about local issues and transport. And if I can ask John Whiteleg. Can you hear that? Is that working?
Yes. Sounds like it's working. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to ask. Please will all candidates explain exactly how much additional climate-related carbon from the construction and increased traffic volumes associated with the North West Route is compatible with the declaration of climate emergencies. And for the avoidance of waffling down, which of the following options apply? 1. No additional carbon is acceptable. 2. We will accept some. 3. If in the case that the road is so strong, we do not need to think about carbon, and we do not need to think about climate emergency.
So, exploring the needs forward against the relief road in light of the climate crisis we find ourselves facing. Julian.
Thank you for the question. So the assumption of your question is that building the relief road is in of itself going to help reduce carbon overall, and therefore will there be an offset against putting it in there, the construction carbon. So I would firstly challenge the first assumption. I think that the North West Relief Road may not reduce congestion. It's not been proven through the evidence that's been put forward. If the problem in Shrewsbury is congestion, we tackle the problem of congestion. So the answer to your question is we shouldn't ask that, we should ask a different question. How do we tackle congestion? And the road might be one of many options put forward, which each must come with its own carbon audit and financial audit, but also social value audit. Now, most of the candidates today, we met this morning at the launch of the Shropshire Cycle Hub, and I personally enjoyed the cycle tour around the town, which was showing us all the pinch points in the town, where the cars are not moving because there's one person sat in each car, and because other cars are parked along the road, blocking traffic through all the main arterial routes and all the way through the town. So the question isn't how much carbon should we tolerate to build a new road. The question is, what should we best do to reduce congestion, carbon, and the consequent air pollution that we currently suffer in Shrewsbury?
There is a difficulty, which is that there is absolutely no question that if we're going to get anywhere near zero carbon, we're actually going to have to invest and make some infrastructure. And there is a carbon cost to some of that infrastructure. There's a carbon cost, for example, to putting in wind farms. But so we have to therefore make a calculation. Is that carbon cost worthwhile? And will it, on balance, lead to carbon reductions? Will it take us in the right direction? And on that, I don't think the road will do that at all. And I think that, but I think on top of that, it won't either solve the problem it is meant to solve, which is the problem of congestion. Now, congestion is a genuine issue. You know, we've probably all experienced it. But congestion is not about people, it's about what they're travelling in. So I sat on Ellesmere Road yesterday and I counted literally 20 cars with an individual person in each car going past me. Now, we know from the work that's been done by Friends of the Earth that we need to see something like a 40% change, modal change, 40% reduction in car usage, and we need to convert to electric vehicles, by the way, but we need to see a massive reduction in car use. Now that means, of those 20 cars, that's 8 people being moved into a different form of transport. That's not impossible. If we had a fantastic bus station, if we had really good walking and cycling infrastructure, then we could easily make that move so that people can begin to move around our town in a much more fair way. And I want to come back to this one about social inclusion now, because we also know that half the people who live in social housing don't have a car. We also know that many single-parent families don't have a car, that many single pensioners don't have a car, that even in the households where there is a car, it will be the bloke who gets the car keys. So it's also about social inclusion. So I think the idea of building a road as a solution to all of this is an absolute disaster. And finally, actually, the evidence doesn't even show it. Every road that has been built, every scheme like this that has been built, has led to more traffic. And we will hear, I suspect, in a minute about the economic argument, how the local businesses are really in favour of all this, but again, it hasn't improved. Roads work two ways, economically as well. The money flows out as much as it flows in. So in terms of any economic benefit, that case has improved. So I think the evidence isn't there, and I think we should be doing much more useful things to make our transport system inclusive and really nice.
Was first proposed about a decade ago, and if at the time it had been immediately implemented and was already moving forward, maybe this would be a different conversation. But the fact is, it's been 10 years, we're in a much worse situation as with the climate, and I don't think the road would genuinely be fit for purpose, because as Julian has said, a brand new wood road would probably encourage more traffic to come through. So as I'm reiterating Julia's point, the point of the road is to reduce congestion in the area, and we should tackle that as the issue rather than going straight for the first option we've got as a possible solution. So reducing congestion would mean investing in public transport in town and investing in park and ride schemes, and encouraging cycling initiatives like Cycle Hub, the charity that was launched this morning, and making it easier to have a more eco-friendly lifestyle that doesn't rely on using a car just as one person. And to reduce the congestion that a lot of it is coming from the A5, perhaps actually going forward the better solution would be to invest in improving the A5 between Shrewsbury and Chirk to be a dual carriageway, which, although wouldn't be brilliant for the environment, would be much better than building that extra link on the ring road around Shrewsbury. And it would be much better for the environment than that road, and it would be a lot safer for people using the road, because most accidents in the area are on that stretch of the A5. Again, it's a controversial issue. Building roads it's an expensive process, and it's an issue that would require a lot more discussion, but destroying our environment is something we have to take seriously, and you've got to consider every direction of every argument before you do something, which is perhaps why this road's taken so long to even get the funding. And we've got to take it seriously and tackle the issues that they're trying to solve. So I think we should sort of involve as many people as possible and come to the best conclusion as a community.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the questioner. I'm very proud that I secured the £58 million from the Department of Transport to build this road. I see the job as a Member of Parliament to listen to the lobbying that takes place from local organisations and constituents, and then to use your position in the House of Commons to try to get the capital investment for those important infrastructure projects. We've been talking about the North West Relief Road for over 40 years, and as your Member of Parliament in the last Parliament, I was approached by Shropshire Council, I was approached by Shrewsbury Business Chamber and Shropshire Chambers of Commerce, that they were telling me that Shrewsbury is growing so quickly that congestion was getting worse and worse in the town centre. I live in Coton Hill and I see the extraordinary gridlock that's taking place in our town, and cars bumper to bumper stationary are causing much more pollution than free flowing through the Northwest Relief Road. And also the other thing is, a lot of parish councils approached me, particularly Beaumer Heath Parish Council, but many others, who were very angry and upset that their rural roads were being used as rat runs by massive articulated lorries. And they all lobbied collectively that I campaign for this road. I know that parts of it will have cycle lanes, and I know that the planning permission on this issue will start in April of next year. And I very much look forward to the construction of this road because it's vital for Shrewsbury's long-term growth, expansion, sustainability.
Thank you very much. Okay, Nat.
Thank you. Well, to answer the question, this road is not justified, and therefore the carbon wasted on it is not justified. By the council's own figures, there will be more congestion down the Berwick Road, down Ellesmere Road, and St Michael Street. Not just congestion, more ambush. And therefore, this is a tragedy. And it's not just a tragedy for all of those negative impacts. It's also a tragedy because it's a waste of time. Because that money that could have been spent, and bear in mind, they say it's 17 million for Shropshire Council. Trust me, after you build a very expensive bridge onto soft ground on the other side, it's going to be more than 17 million. That 17 million could have been spent on buses. It could have been spent on cycleways. It could have been spent on improving the environment. So therefore, it's a double tragedy, this, and I think we shouldn't be supporting it at all.
Thank you. If we can now move on to the next question now. Wildlife oriented question. Charlie Bell.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about carbon and climate, which is great, but we are also in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. And what I mean by that is the rapid loss of species and the degradation of ecosystems. And many scientists think that this biodiversity crisis is probably a greater threat than climate change at the moment to the future of humankind on Earth. One of the main drivers of this biodiversity crisis is habitat loss due to intensive agriculture. So, do the candidates accept that we should be tackling the biodiversity crisis with as much urgency as the climate crisis? And how would they reconcile the need for food production with the urgent need to protect our wildlife and our ecosystems?
So a big question for Shropshire and Shrewsbury. The biodiversity crisis of the county, which has an awful lot of farmland and an awful lot of people relying on agriculture for a living, for the food that it produces. Julian.
I think, like the climate crisis, we have to accept that the biodiversity crisis is down to human activity, that we're simply squeezing the area that nature has in such a way that it is causing untold damage. We're looking at something like 1,000 times the rate of, extinctions happen, and will probably happen to humans at some stage, but let's not worry about that just yet. But extinctions happen, but they are happening at 1,000 times the rate that they should be happening. They've been happening in natural history. And it is down to human activity, and it is effectively down to how we manage our land. So we have lost enormous amounts of forestry. But in terms of the UK, I'm afraid it is down to the way we manage our land, and in particular to our farming practice. And so it does come to how we are going to manage our food and how we're going to manage our land. And that does require some serious thinking and some serious shifting in how we do that. And that is in part, that's about moving away from meat as a primary form of protein in our diets. I don't think it necessarily means ruling it out, but it does mean that we have to drastically think about that. We plant the size of Yorkshire in soybeans, not for human consumption, but for for beef cows to eat in order that we can then eat them. It is an extremely inefficient way of using land. It was fine when we were a small population, but we are now in a situation where it simply is unsustainable. And so we have to have a new deal for nature as well. And that means beginning to rewild parts of our land. It means subsidy, it means the support that we give to farmers in part has to be to make sure that they allow parts of their farms to be wild. It means reintroducing the hedgerows. And it also means actually changing the nature of some of our organisations. We have areas of outstanding national beauty and we have national parks. But actually their project, when they were set up, it was about preserving the beautiful landscape for us to enjoy. It wasn't actually about preserving the wildlife and the nature. So we have to repurpose many of our organisations. So we need a new deal for the land, for nature. And luckily the Green Party's just written one. Now, I'm going to go through all bits and pieces because I only had a chance today to read it. But those are in there. So I'll pass it.
To start with, I'm just going to reiterate the same point Julian's made. It's important that we figure out the best way to have effective management of farming land and farming processes. And we need to raise awareness of the biodiversity crisis and protect the habitats that we are slowly destroying, or not even slowly, and raise awareness of being an act to preserve these marine areas that support so many different species and animals. It's as a farming community, it is important that we recognise that is a lot of people's livelihood, that it's depending on that, it's depending on farming. And I think the way forward is to find reasonable management of farming and being able to balance sort of livestock and arable farming with also preserving habitats in the same areas.
Well, anybody who has studied the Common Agricultural Policy, which is designed and implemented by Brussels, will know that there's very little in the CAP, which is predicated and focused on environmental factors and encouraging farmers to ensure that they focus on the environment. As we pull out of the European Union, we will be able to have our own British agricultural policy, which is designed and created by a British sovereign parliament. And of course, they will be accountable directly to you through the ballot box. And in my manifesto, it says that British agriculture, 100% will be conditional. We will continue to give subsidies to farmers, of course, because we understand the importance of agriculture, particularly in the county I branch. But 100% will be conditional on good environmental stewardship by farmers. So they will be paid these subsidies on the basis of how they treat the land and the countryside around them. That is going to be a very, very major difference from the Common Agricultural Policy which we have had to follow over the last 47 years. Also, by leaving the EU means that we can ban live exports of animals, which we intend to do. We are increasing the maximum sentence for cruelty to animals from 6 months to 5 years. We are recognising the principle of animals' sentience in law. We banned the use of wild animals in circuses. We banned ivory trade in the United Kingdom, and we have ensured that CCTV is in all slaughterhouses.
Well, it's a bit rich for the Tories to blame Brussels for all these problems. It has the power to protect the environment. And in fact, the Tory government, they set out a 25-year environment plan, but they failed to provide the resources for it. They continue to slash funding in real terms for the environmental organisations like Natural England, the Environment Agency, Forestry Commission and National Parks. They failed to bring forward new bills to restore our natural environment. The promised environment bill, still not in the military draft stage, May 8, 2018. And the proposed Office of Environmental Protection will not have the teeth to hold the government to account. Agricultural bill, aiming to transform our farming into public money for public good, has not been debated since autumn 2018. Instead, they're failing our farmers. In fact, what we should be doing is introducing a Nature Act to restore the natural environment through setting legally binding near-term and long-term targets, and improving water, air, soil and biodiversity, supported by a funding stream of at least 18 billion over 5 years. And this way, we can go back to reducing the degradation of our sites of scientific interest and other key areas. Thank you.
I was also interested to hear Daniel's analysis of the EU's effect on agriculture, because recent research from economists show that 50% of farmers are at risk of going out of business if we have a dangerous no-deal Brexit, and that 96% of UK sheep farmers export entirely to the EU. So actually farmers are the people who are most scared by the Brexit. Point about the disinvestment which Daniel, amongst other Conservative MPs, have voted for, so those cuts through to the vital biodiversity. Labour's plan is for a nature plan, and it's to invest in 3 major areas. We'll put 1.2 billion back into national parks. It was the Labour Party that created the first 5 national parks, and we will create another 10. I can't promise that the Shropshire area, the Shropshire Hills is going to be one of them, but it would be fabulous, wouldn't it, if it finally got its status. The second thing is 2.5 billion for tree planting, because our forests, again voted by Daniel to sell them off, have lost their protection, and we need to increase the woodland in this country. And finally, as a replacement to the CAP, or to work alongside it, depending what the people decide, is a national transformation fund. So putting in place an investment in sustainable agriculture. You know, Shropshire is the 2nd largest county in the country for these really intense farming practices, which aren't just harming the environment, but actually they're harming the animals, the air pollution, and actually the workers who live carrying out that work. So rather like the green policy, some of that investment will only be given to farmers who uphold the protections of their biodiversity and stop using strong pesticides on their land. Thank you.
Fact checkers here who's going to read, we're not Channel 4, so we can get on over. But I can assure you that the last few questions, it has been 30 or 40 years we've been talking about the ring road. And the income from farmers, yes, in a few years' time, 50 or 60% of them, according to NFU figures, could see a drop in 60% of their income. So there's some real big changes going to happen in our rural environment here in Shropshire and Shrewsbury. That's when they comment about new extinction. I can't be hearing facts and I'll see Julian afterwards. We're going to move on now to the next question. This is around emissions. Stella Lewis to say that, please.
Hi, I'm Belle. I recently turned 18 and I'm here because I'm absolutely terrified about the state of the world that I've inherited from you. I've been absolutely kind of simultaneously furious and heartbroken by how recent governments have handled this crisis. Not only have they failed to mitigate the effects, they've actively promoted the destruction of our environment. So in light of this, I'd like to remind the candidates of what the UN Secretary General has warned us this week, that point of no return is no longer over the horizon. It is in sight and hurtling towards us. A UN report published last week confirmed that greenhouse gas emissions have risen last year, and they conclude that we now need to reduce emissions by 7.6% every year for the next 10 years to avoid devastating climate breakdown. How are you going to
7.6% reductions as of now. How are we going to do it?
Implement those policies, in a sentence. We need to actually act on these policies to put in legislation that puts restrictions on carbon emissions on these big companies that produce so much carbon, well, they produce the majority of the carbon emissions, and that needs to be cut back. There are currently subsidies on fossil fuels that shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be supporting that anymore. Those subsidies need to be moved towards sustainable and renewable energy that we are supporting as a way of, well, for the national grid really, to support all energy. We need to move completely away from fossil fuels, and that is on a national, the biggest scale, that's what we have to do. Beyond that, we need to, on a national level, but in local areas, is implement all of these policies that will improve transport, so that, because I mean, transport does produce about a fifth of the total emissions, which relative to sort of agriculture and food waste, it's a lot of it, and so we need to put in those policies so that we are reducing emissions in every aspect. It's not just about one part of our lives. We have to cut emissions everywhere. So, end of the day, it's about acting as quickly as possible and putting in strict policies that get those emissions cut now, and so we can lead in the world by example, so that hopefully other countries will follow in our footsteps, and hopefully in the next decade we will have a net zero world.
Well, of course, you're absolutely right that we have to focus on this, and I should be in the House of Commons focusing on it right now. But of course, we've had to have a general election. We've had to have a general election because the elephant in the room, Brexit, which Shrewsbury voted for, we haven't been able to implement. And if you could have been there in the House of Commons over the last 2 years, if you could have seen the gridlock and the paralysis and the constant Brexit merry-go-round, how Labour and the Lib Dems have prevented us from implementing this. We need to get Brexit done. We need to vote Conservative so that we can pull out on the 31st of January, and then we can focus on things that we have to deal.
Am I allowed to? That's not helpful. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. This is a man out.
Just answer the question.
Give him a chance to answer the question.
But one thing I have learned is that I think we've made a mistake over the last 14 years. The Shropshire MPs, the MP for North Shropshire and South Shropshire and myself, we meet regularly. You say, what are you going to do? MPs don't work by themselves, they work with colleagues. And what we do is we meet at the Shire Hall every other month with key stakeholders across Shropshire. Police, representatives from the police, healthcare, education, the people who really matter in the constituency. And what we do is we work with them to understand their priorities and then collectively try to lobby government on their behalf. So I'm very impressed with the number of people who have come here today, the strength of feeling on this issue. If re-elected, and if Mr. Jamie Russell from Shrewsbury Climate for Change can organise a platform, then I will ensure that this organisation has regular meetings with all Shropshire MPs to continue discussing this issue and then lobbying government on your behalf.
Thank you. Well, the question was about emissions. So we're talking primarily about vehicles. First thing we need to do is reform the vehicle tax so that we can encourage more electric vehicles. We need to have all new vehicles on the road to be electric vehicles by 2030. We need to pass the Clean Air Act, something that hasn't been done for a long time and something is desperately needed. And also we need to extend ultra-low emission zones to improve the environment for those people who actually live in built-up areas. We need to reduce the impact of flying, and so we need to tax frequent flyers, and that's something we will be doing. And we need a moratorium on more runways. I've touched on this before, but yes, we need to reduce single-use journeys, and that is something which can probably be done by road pricing and taxation. And also, we need to amend the planning rules so that our towns are actually built in a sustainable fashion, where the infrastructure is put in first before we build the houses.
Well, personally, I'm delighted that Daniel is not in the House of Commons, because when he was there, he voted twice against public subsidy for buses, twice against incentives for low-carbon electricity, twice to sell off England's state-owned forests, and 10 times against measures that would have prevented climate change. Conservatives consistently vote to retain fossil fuels, but they have registered more interest in the parliamentary standards for gifts and support from fossil fuel companies than from any other sector. What's our positive vision? So yes, we will invest in large renewable projects. We want 60% of UK's energy to come from renewable sources, but also the package we talked about earlier to help normal householders themselves invest with grants or loans to improve their own homes with renewable projects like solar panels. But it's also about investing in public transport. If we can bring the trains and buses back into public ownership, we make them viable and frequent and regular and electric, and people will actually start to use them. But finally, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it's not just the state's job to come in and put this right. We've also got to shine a light on what's gone wrong. And at the moment, the pension funds are investing so much money in fossil fuels that they are dictating the future. And we must all put pressure on all of our pension funds, whether in public sector or in our own investments, to make sure that we disinvest in fossil fuels. They have no place.
Fact check on your vote, Did you give Daniel a second just to respond? You seem to be
Publicly available. Julian? Parliamentary website.
Use the microphone.
You throw me now. What was going to say? So it's fantastic to hear this range of policies that these parties are finally coming up with to deal with this crisis. And I'm not going to go through a lot more detail, because what I want to think about is where that sits in the mix. Because what worries me is that alongside some very fine policies, we are still hearing from all the major parties plans for airport expansion. The Labour Party, I'm afraid, has so far been enabling plans to expand Heathrow. We're hearing plans for HS2. Now, I'm in favour of high-speed rail, I'm in favour of rail expansion, but that is a crazy scheme about getting business people up and down between Birmingham and London for half an hour quicker, where we need to be spending that money on the sort of regional infrastructure of public transport, which will actually give people the real choice to get out of their cars and to use a sustainable and community-based transport. We still have major road building schemes, not just the one that was meant to go around Shrewsbury. And actually, I do want to pay tribute to both the campaigners, but also to the Labour Party's government in Wales, which has cancelled the massive scheme which was going to expand on the M4 corridor. That's great. Meanwhile, in Herefordshire, a new council administration, which includes the Green Party, is on its way to cancelling the bypass there. So I think that a lot of the stuff that we're hearing, which is a plan for good stuff, is wonderful, but there's also some things we have to stop doing. We have to stop the sort of investments which are continuing to add carbon. Let's just think about the way it works. The more carbon we add now, the more we have to take out before 2050. In other words, we can't do this slowly. You have to make these emission cuts now and as rapidly as possible to make them full variable. If we leave it, it becomes an absolute nightmare of a cliff edge. We've left it too late, frankly, already. We should have started 20, 30 years ago. But luckily, we are told by the scientists we can just still do it, but we have to start immediately, and part of that mix has to be about putting this right at the centre of politics, right at the centre of policy. That's why we will rename the Chancellor of the Exchequer the Carbon Chancellor, because we think it has to be at the heart of policy, and then we will cancel all these carbon-emitting policies which are still in every other party's policies.
Next question now, around land use. Nigel or Jackie, here we go. It looks like Nigel.
Given the grave concerns about the climate and the environment, what is your party's stance on intensive farming? I appreciate that agriculture is a major industry and important to our county. However, it has been shown that intensive farming, such as chicken sheds containing tens of thousands of chickens, have a significant effect on the environment in terms of greenhouse gases, such as from the waste along with other factors. How is the farming industry in Shropshire going to make the transition from a high-emitting industry to a sustainable industry, and how will your party help the farmers do that?
So, farming equipment industry, in some ways they should be the forefront to lead this charge. Daniel.
Well, as I've already said, we are, as we pull out of the European Union, we are going to be able to have our own agricultural policy, which is formulated in conjunction with the National Farmers Union. We are having intensive discussions with the NFU nationally, but also locally here. I have regular meetings with Shropshire NFU. They are feeding directly into the national planning formula as to how we incentivise Shropshire and British farmers to ensure that they are paid in a way through their subsidies which ensures protection of the environment and makes sure that they contribute to the well-being and safety of wildlife and hedgerows and all the other things which are very important here in Shropshire. The other thing I just want to say is this: the buck will stop with us, and you will be able to vote for or throw out. I mean, clearly the people in this audience feel very strongly about the environment and about the countryside and about agricultural practices. That's why you've come to this church. I asked some constituents whether they've met with their MEPs or whether they've actually engaged with the process in the European Parliament. I asked them whether they know who the MEPs are. And none of them can tell me who they are, because none of the MEPs live in Shropshire. None of the MEPs live in Shropshire. None of them have offices in Shropshire. None of them come to Shropshire. And by the way, they work in another country. By pulling out of the European Union, you're going to ensure that Parliament is directly accountable to this, and you will be able to either vote for or reject any political party in government that does not meet the high standards that you expect of agriculture.
We've always been able to.
One of the problems that farmers face is the domination of the market by the large supermarkets. And what we'd like to do is introduce a national food strategy, which will include the use of public procurement policy to promote production and consumption of healthy food. But we want to support producers by broadening the remit of the groceries code adjudicator and support them with access to markets. And in doing so, that will mean that small-scale farmers will have greater access to the wide-scale market, and in doing so, they will be able to bring in far more sustainable forms of agriculture. Another thing we intend to do is reduce the basic agricultural support payments to larger recipients and put them and give it mainly to the small farmers. And in doing so, we will expect effective land management, and that will include restoring nature and protecting the countryside, protecting flooding and preventing flooding, and combating climate change through reducing soil carbon and expanding native woodlands. As question, as a matter of the chicken farms, I'm afraid at the moment the planning system allows them through, and it's very, very difficult to stop them. That will be something we'll have to tackle with perhaps a new planning law that says that all chicken farms must be up to a standard at which that you cannot have these large-scale battery farms which are abhorrent.
Well, I actually agree with Daniel Kawczynski. I think that your parliament is responsible for what happens here, and I think that if you're not happy with your current representative, you should accept his invitation to throw him out. So I mentioned that Labour's policy is to create this national transformation fund, and it's to help have that local transformation in creating small, local, community-based farms where they are responsible for their land, where they must be responsible for all the products that they use on that land, and that we're looking to help them reduce the intensity of farming. I've heard the same policies mentioned 3 times now from 3 different parties. So I think the real question is, which party can get into power to bring this about? Which party is going to set aside serious money, in our case £2.5 billion, and make it happen? And which party is not too shy to say that we will tax multinational corporations to make sure the money is there to make this happen?
So, the question was related to intensive farming. Intensive farming clearly has all sorts of knock-on effects in terms of biodiversity. Actually, if you think about the runoff that comes from things like chicken farms and the emissions from chicken farms, it clearly is a damaging way to farm. We know, because the practice has been developed now, that sustainable farming and extensive farming, both of crops and horticulture, but also of some meat, is possible, and it is possible to do it in a way which can feed people without creating the problems. But what we are facing is a possible Tory government which wants to not only pull out of Europe, but then wants to do a deal with the United States. So I just need to let you know something about the standards of United States food production. So US producers are allowed to include up to 30 insect fragments in a 100-gram jar of peanut butter, 11 rodent hairs in 25 grams of paprika, and 3 Romanian excreta, I won't unpick that one for you, per every pound. That's not part of my policy, no, that's where we will end up in terms of agricultural practice if we don't look after our own practice. And the final point is this, that means we need proper, independent adjudication of those practices. And again, the policy that the Tories are proposing when we pull out of the EU is that yes, they will have an agency to look after the environment, but that agency will go to the Secretary of State for Agriculture, cap in hand, to be funded. In other words, the piper pays the tune. You know, they will be in hops, so they won't be independent control. Currently, we have EU law, which makes sure that we have clean beaches, that is trying to make sure that we have clean air quality, and we need to keep that independence. And actually, over 84% of the population favour keeping hold of those environmental and worker standards that we currently enjoy as part of the EU.
Ecological agriculture. We need to support local farmers and local production of food so that they can manage better land and better farming production without such intense pressures with the industrial competition in that market. And without that pressure to overproduce, it means that they're able to then think more carefully about, well, not necessarily carefully, but they then have that space to effectively manage how everything is processed and not be cramming 10,000 chickens into such a small space. And part of that also links into being self-sufficient as a country, and that if we support local produce, it means that we're not shipping in thousands of cows from New Zealand and so all these animals from elsewhere in the world. That's also creating more issues with with international travel just for food. And within agriculture, we support natural climate solutions and support subsidies for farmers that can provide better care for animals and more nutrient-rich soil for vegetables and sort of a more vegan diet from farming. Yeah, we need to support farmers as far as we can and put in the policies to protect them.
Our next question has a brief reference to trade, business and trade. Ask Suzanne Freeguard.
United States officials told UK counterparts that greenhouse gas emission reductions cannot be mentioned in any future trade deal between the US and the UK. This is according to UK Department for International Trade papers, which were released in redacted form following a Freedom of Information request and then leaked in full. Many international trade deals contain the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Mechanism. This mechanism gives foreign companies the right to sue governments over decisions that the companies believe could affect their profits. This happens in secretive tribunals outside of national legal systems. How will the candidates make sure that any future UK trade negotiations are open to democratic scrutiny and that any future trade deals promote the ability of national governments to take action on climate change and protect the environment?
Thank you for that. Well, there's a very easy answer from the Liberal Democrats. Let's not leave the European Union. What has just been described is what will happen if we leave and we're forced to make a trade deal with the United States, all alone, just a little island stuck out in the Atlantic, with the Americans ready to take a great big bite out of us. So, let's stay in the European Union with all the protections, with all the democratic oversight from the European Parliament, and let us ensure, by doing so, that we can actually, by being in the European Union, we can actually make the European Union even better. So that is why we should stay in. Let's avoid all of this altogether. Let's stay in the European Union. Let's stay with European rules regarding health and safety, and also regarding commercial sensitivities. Let's stay there. Thank you.
So we've just heard the Liberal Democrat position on Europe, which is a kind of extreme remain, sort of revoked no matter what the democratic voice said. And I dare say before we'll hear once again the Conservative extreme position to leave with a reckless no deal. The Labour Party's position would protect us from exactly the scenario that you described, whilst upholding democracy and asking people to move together in a consensus. The Labour Party wants to respect the view of every single person in this room. We would like to put to you a referendum within 6 months, but you have a choice of two things. You can either remain, as Nat would probably choose to do so, or you can look at our safe Brexit. It's a Brexit that keeps us in the customs union, so the place that Nat enjoys and all those farmers would love to stay. 40 free trade deals with 70 countries, underpinned by ethical, environmental, health standards. Our safe Brexit retains environmental protections and workers' rights. You can still leave the politics, you can still leave the legal wrangling, but you could just keep the trade. If you listen to my 80-year-old dad, he'll say, but when we were asked to vote the first time, it was just a trade deal. In a sense, we'll be peeling back the last 40 years and offering you that original trade deal. That's our safe Brexit, and I've been knocking on probably 2,500 doors in the last few weeks. And Remainers and Leavers are both saying to me that they could live with either of those outcomes. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not argue on two polar extremes. Let's not divide this church tonight. Let's listen to each other and ask ourselves, is that a consensus in the middle that carries democracy, that carries a majority, that protects us from this doomsday scenario, but leaves perhaps some of the politics behind? And it will be a democratic choice of this country within 6 months.
So Julia has got clearer and clearer on her Brexit policy during these hustings. It's quite interesting. So we're now looking at the customs union. Well, good. So we're now looking at the customs union Brexit. That doesn't give us freedom of movement. So what that doesn't give us is all the NHS workers that we so desperately need. It doesn't give our young people the opportunities that they currently have and enjoy in terms of moving and working in Europe. It doesn't give our elderly people the opportunities to move to Europe as pensioners and to enjoy a bit of sun. So I think it's not actually, and I don't think there is any such thing as a safe Brexit. So I do stand, but I do believe that we have to put this back to the people. I do think there is a democratic deficit in the idea of simply turning it over, as the Liberal Democrats are suggesting. See, I think that when we talk about respecting the voters, it is the voters we need to respect, not the outcome of that one vote. The voters had an opportunity to make a decision then. Why can't they have another opportunity 2.5 years later with a lot of information, with a lot of water under the bridge to make another decision? Clearly, it's a different decision, and so I think that needs to go back to voters. But to come to the point of the question, which was about the types of international trade agreements that we face, I think quite interestingly, a few years ago, there was an attempt to negotiate exactly that sort of agreement with the United States, between the EU and the United States, the TTIP agreement, and it fell apart. And it fell apart in part because of the pressure from below. So I think whether we're in or whether we're out, it's about the movement. It's about the fact that people are prepared to stand up and are prepared to begin to get to grips with some of these quite technical arguments, about whether companies should take governments to court. Of course they shouldn't be allowed to. But I think that it's about mobilising that movement. So one of the things that I've had in my mind really throughout this campaign, throughout this election, is that whatever happens on the 13th of December, we need a massively strong environmental and people's movement that will continue to push these things. Whichever government we end up with, we will have international organisations, we will have international companies to deal with, that we need to keep pushing. And in the end, it will be down to us to make sure those sorts of deals don't destroy the world.
I just want to say it's actually a shame that this is a question we have to realistically consider. Everyone in the world should care about the climate crisis enough that this shouldn't be something we have to try to negotiate around. Brexit aside, we need legislation really that protects environmental standards so that whatever happens, whatever our efforts are, they won't be negated by any trade deals internationally. And honestly, I think one of the best ways to do that would be actually maintaining the trade deal with the EU, because as we all know, the EU has exceptional environmental laws that trade with the EU would then, on their behalf, it would be compliant with EU environmental laws, and whichever way Brexit turns out in the next year or so, it's up to us as a nation to make sure that we respect environmental standards, and keeping trade with the EU means that they will also respect it on their side. I think as a global issue, we need to make sure that environmental standards are kept at the top of our priorities with whatever the issue is.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned the EU and new trade deals, but also you mentioned the United States of America. We have this extraordinary, today, political arrangement with the European Union, but we have a trade deficit of over £91 billion a year. With the United States of America, we have no political alignment, none of this sort of relationship that we have had with the European Union, and yet we have a trade surplus with the United States of America of over £40 billion a year. And what really concerns me is that the European Union is actually a protectionist racket. When you have 28 countries, you have to take into consideration every single country's priorities and the things that they want to protect. And what really worries me is that Commonwealth countries find it very, very difficult to export to us because of the massive tariff imposed by the European Union. We give £15 billion of your money, as I said to you, every year in aid to third world countries. But what we want to do is when we pull out of the European Union, we want to slash tariffs on things that we can't grow here in the United Kingdom.
Tell us about the lemons.
To ensure that there is greater access for third world countries, rather than just giving them aid, they have access to the 5th largest economy in the world so that they can export their goods and services. Now, there are no tariffs on coffee. Why? Because you can't grow coffee in Europe. Massive tariffs for roasted coffee, designed to protect the inefficient coffee roasting industries of Italy and Germany. I don't want to buy my roasted coffees directly from the Kenyans. Let them have the processing industries, which is the really value add to help the populations of their countries. And the Labour Party, the Labour Party want to now have another 6 months of delay whilst they renegotiate the deal. And by the way, I think our international reputation has already suffered as a result of the delays. But they want another 6 months of delay and dither on this issue. They want to negotiate something, basically, which is remaining in the European Union, so we remain in the civil market, in the customs union, and have free movement of people. And then they want to campaign against the deal that they negotiated. That would be disastrous for our country.
Bravo! Right, we have our final question, kind of statement, really. So I'll ask Frank Oldacre to maybe a bit of a challenge to the candidates.
Well, I'm Frank Oldacre from Friends of the Earls. This question is actually being asked with all candidates that we can get to all around the country. And it is, will you please sign the following pledge? I'll make the climate crisis a deal breaker in how I vote in Parliament. I'll vote to support measures that help us rapidly cut greenhouse gas emissions and build a fairer and greener society.
We ensure that every policy that we have will have a climate at its heart, and therefore, yes, I agree with that.
Yes, that reflects entirely our manifesto. I'm sure all the Labour candidates would have signed that pledge, and I'd be happy to do so. All the candidates were also approached by the Shropshire Wildlife Trust with some questions that we were asked to answer, and my answers are on that website. I think the others are still getting round to replying. But we're very keen, we're very interested in this, and we've taken time to make this our priority.
And your answer is on our website now.
Really? Okay. So, absolutely. So, you know, if you look at our manifesto, the Green New Deal is absolutely front and central to it. Everything we are talking about is tied around that. But the exciting thing about it is that it also makes people's lives better. That it also delivers, you know, people talk about a fair transition, and it's doable. But it's a hell of a hard task, but we need to start now.
As an independent candidate, that's exactly why I'm standing as an independent, so that I can genuinely represent exactly what people want me to. So, of course, I signed that pledge. Honestly, dealing with the climate crisis is a literal literal do or die situation.
Yes, I'm happy to sign that pledge.
Close on the questions. We're not going to have an open session. It could be a bit chaotic. I'm sure the candidates will be more than happy to talk to you afterwards. So what I'd like to do is thank the candidates for their tremendous answers, their responses, their passion. Likewise yourselves as well. Thank you so much for coming out.